Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause to all of our panelists. So tonight, the Executive Board has prepared a diverse list of questions for our panelists. During the program, any audience members can pose questions to our panelists using the hashtag SBL2K16 in order to participate in that conversation. And then at the end of the program, we will have time for the audience members to ask questions using the hashtag, as well as asking questions physically here in person. Panelists, make sure that all of your answers are direct and concise as possible because we have so many questions to get through tonight. Please do not feel any pressure to answer every single question because we don't have the time. And finally, audience members, I ask that you all please be respectful in respecting the mic and the panelists and their answers. Are there any questions tonight about protocol? Phenomenal. Okay. The hashtag is SBL2K16. Okay. So now we'll begin with the first set of questions. Okay, so the first question to our panelists is, how do current public policies we have in place, particularly in Maryland, fuel mass incarceration and police brutality? Would you like me to repeat the question? How do current public policies we have in place, particularly in Maryland, fuel mass incarceration and police brutality? Just hit the bottom of the microphone.
It's hard to say specifically in Maryland because, as we all know, the system is completely set up so that it's kind of an integral part of the American economy. All of the policies are, not all of them, but most of them are fueled so that we feed into the monster that is the prison industrial complex. And right now we're kind of waking up to that fact, but it's been like that since post-slavery. So,
thank you.
There are definitely a series of policies that lead to the current era of mass incarceration that we see today. So for example, just over the past 2 decades, one big policy has dealt with stand your ground laws. So one of the things that people don't realize is that up until around the year 2000, we didn't necessarily have stand your ground laws. Obviously, stand your ground laws state that you can actually take the law into your own hands and commit a crime against someone else, even for simply fearing something. The other thing that we have to realize is in the 1980s, we started to see Rockefeller drug laws implemented that essentially allows for crack cocaine to be criminalized at a much higher rate than powder cocaine. And of course, this becomes racialized because crack cocaine is the less expensive, diluted version of cocaine, yet it's more likely to be sold in inner cities that happen to be poor and also happen to be predominantly black, which means that now black people who might be engaging in drug activity are more likely to not only be arrested, but also be given longer sentences for engaging in similar activities that whites are actually doing. So one thing that people don't get is that drug activity is actually similar across race. Moreover, blacks are no more likely to engage in drug activity than whites. In fact, some studies document that whites are much more likely to engage in drug activity than blacks. Yet, blacks are much more likely to be arrested and sentenced for engaging in drug activity.
I guess kind of speaking on the drug aspect in DC, whether you are for it or not, the fact that marijuana has been decriminalized and legalized recreationally, actually right down the street from my job, if I go up the street just to go to carry out, you can see people growing in their basements. Like through their windows, you can see the lights, you can see the leaves, and I think that one of the things that's really prominent right now, at least with marijuana laws and legalization, actually trying to grow an economy out of it, at least on a minority standpoint, a lot of the people who are getting the licenses to sell medically or recreationally are not minorities. The disproportion is incredible. The applications are there. There's no shortage of applications in order to create a business out of marijuana, but they're just not being accepted from black folks, from minorities in general. And I think it's also ironic in the fact that I myself in high school had a run with the law because of marijuana. And one, it was expensive as hell. Two, I was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to go here because I had that ding on my record. And the fact that Colorado, Washington, is it Oregon too? DC, it's a multi-billion-dollar field right now. And what somebody is kicking back, chilling on a stack of millions, billions of dollars, almost put me in jail. And I just think the fact that when something becomes decriminalized and it doesn't reflect fairly or equally, proportionately between races, that's a problem. That's a huge problem, especially when it's something that can actually do the exact opposite of what it did, from incarcerating people to providing a future for them, their families, their children, their communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As you can tell, I'm definitely for marijuana. I'm not going to speak on much more about that. So I'm going to pass this mic.
Thank you. Sorry about that, just tap the bottom of the microphone.
Testing, that worked. I think a big part of the problem is the public perception as well. We have a presidential candidate, Donald Trump, who's running on a law and order platform, which has done enormously destructive things in the past. But I won't single him out as the sole bearer of that. I do believe that there is a widespread population who also supports that movement, and that is largely white people who are supporting that. And I do believe that it is also the responsibility of the population as well to tell their politicians what is and what is not okay. The recent movie by Ava DuVernay, 13th, one of the things that has been universal among everybody that I've talked to who has seen that movie was that they learned something new about that movie, in that movie. That should not be the case. Everything that was in that movie should be taught in our schools, and it's not. And so, therefore, we have presidential candidates getting away with running on platforms like that, where the school-to-prison pipeline is encouraged, where mass incarceration is encouraged, because the perception is that if we lock up enough people of color, then life will somehow be better and we'll make America great again. That cannot be, and we have to stand up for that, especially white people.
Thank you so much.
To go back to your comments around policies, you focused on questions of economics. So the first thing that I want to bring up is the fact that the policing and monitoring and jailing of Black bodies is incredibly profitable, right? There is a corporation called, I believe, the Corrections Corporation of America. It's traded publicly, right? So if you have money, some money laying around, you can go and invest in a corporation that runs jails in the US. So we always have to keep in mind the ways in which the policing, jailing, and monitoring of Black people, right? Black and brown bodies, men and women, is incredibly profitable.
Thank you. Just a reminder to our panelists, everyone doesn't have to answer the question, so I appreciate you all's phenomenal responses to that, but just for the sake of time, we're going to keep moving. So now we're going to move on to the theme of gender. So how does gender inequality play a part in the movement for Black lives that we've been seeing thus far?
I mean, gender plays a huge role because on one hand, so we've done an analysis of Twitter data for over the past 2 years, over 30 million tweets. And what we found is that male names are much more likely to be given attention than female names. So moreover, Corinne Gaines, of course, we know about Sandra Bland, but outside of that name, that's one of the only names that we can mention. And this becomes problematic because obviously Black Lives Matter was started by 3 Black queer women. But yet still, the activists that we pay attention to and the names and the incidents that we focus on tend to be male. Now, On one hand, we do know that black males are more likely to experience brutality and death at the hands of police officers. However, when we look at gender, black women also experience quite a bit of brutality and are definitely more likely to be killed by the police than women of other groups. So part of this is the broader narrative in society about the ways that we privilege maleness over women as it relates to the experiences that they have. And this is part of the whole hashtag of Say Her Name, which is another analysis that we're doing. And the positive thing that's coming out of that analysis is that we do find that there are a lot of men who are using that hashtag as well. But I think it speaks more broadly to the media attention around these incidents. So for example, y'all know about the Korean Gangs incident in Baltimore?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I will hope so, because that's A, right down the street, B, a crazy traumatic incident, but C, and unfortunately, it didn't go national. So you have a woman killed in her house holding her 5-year-old, and her 5-year-old was shot, and that's something that we don't feel should be on national news. So part of it is not only us not focusing on it, but also the media not focusing on it, which is why when it comes to social media and the presence that you all have as young adults, you have now the power to actually craft and shape that narrative. And we have to shape that narrative accurately about the experiences that not just black men go through, but also that black women encounter.
This question kind of resonates with me. I have to take this opportunity to kind of call out black men right now. Not generalizing, I know I'm speaking to the choir, but it seems like we're all in a consensus that racism is bad. And this is just my experiences, the people I've encountered through my work and internet and everything, but it seems like, say the word feminism, oh, women are whining again. Ask a black man, not all, don't take these as generalizations. If he's a feminist, no, he won't say he's a feminist. Bring up, gay or LGBTQ rights, oh, they don't want to hear about that. A threat to, injustice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere. So I'd like to challenge you all, or to challenge your male friends to kind of step it up in that regard.
Y'all not gonna snap for that or like anything like that's all I have to say on that one. Don't go.
Okay, so going on to that, both Dr. Ray and Ceaira touched on a great point about gender. So and sexuality. Let's move on to the next portion of the fact that Black Lives Matter was created by 3 queer black people. So how does sexuality, or how does sexuality not play a part in the movement for Black Lives? So if you're obligated to stand for Black Lives Matter, are you also obligated to stand for the rights of LGBTQIA Black lives?
Yes. Just straight up, yes. Here. I think the one of the things about Black Lives Matter is, one of the points of it is to show that there's such a diverse array of black life on this planet, and especially in this country. And I think that it's something that people don't really pay attention to, at least not in the mainstream. I myself, I was in the orchestra in 3rd grade, and even from 3rd grade all the way through high school, and there was one incident where I was called into the principal's office. Long story short, somebody made a threat to burn down the bathroom or something, just being stupid. But they thought like I had something to do with it, and they thought I was hiding like matches or something in my viola case. Because that makes sense. 12-year-old arsonist out here. The point was, he asked me to play my viola as if to prove that I am good at what I did. Don't get me wrong, I'm flames, but as a 12-year-old to walk this earth with an instrument that you love, doing something that you love, and being questioned about your love and your passion for that instrument based on your race, sexuality, anything. I am one of every single different kind of black person on this planet. Each of you are one of every single different kind of black person on this planet. White people too, y'all got some black in you, I bet. So, but the point is, we have to stand up for each other, regardless of your sexual orientation. That's a part of the entire thing. And if you leave any of us out, you're not a part of the movement. You can't say you're a part of the movement. And I hope to God that anybody who says they're part of the movement and they say something to the contrary, that you call them out on the spot in defense of the movement and in defense of yourself, because they're hurting the movement and they're hurting you. They're hurting your children's future. And I would hope that you all step up and defend that.
So the phrase isn't some Black Lives Matter. The phrase is Black Lives Matter, right? And so when we think about, I always talk about history, so you just have to bear with me. When you think about the legacy of social justice organizing and Black organizing in the 60s and 70s, you always had queer, gay, and lesbian Black folks in the room. For example, James Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry, Bayard Rustin, and even in the contemporary moment, we have the three folks who started the Black Lives Matter hashtag, as well as DeRay, right, a self-identified gay Black man. So the other thing that I want to mention when it comes to coalition politics and organizing, the folks with the most privileges, right, are responsible for protecting the most vulnerable person in the room. So this is how this plays out in my life. Halloween is next Monday, right? So last year when the Little Bears came, I always asked for the youngest and littlest to come to the front. You get all the chocolate candy, right? You get to dig into the basket and get whatever you want. The big kids, you wait until last and you get whatever is left over. That is one of the ways in which you see how this plays out in my life. Again, the most vulnerable people, and with regard to this moment, right, a racialized and sexual minority is the most vulnerable person, should be protected.
I echo that statement completely. Black Lives Matter is not conditional in any way, shape, or form. And yet, repeatedly, over and over and over, when I am clandestinely going into white spaces and listening to the conversations that are there, repeatedly, I hear conversations that question whether or not someone's life mattered, whoever's hashtag happens to be that day. And the answer to that is Black Lives Matter is not conditional on anything. The biggest condition that gets brought up is criminality. And I can't tell you, especially speaking on, as Dr. Ray brought up, Corinne Gaines, her history, her marital status, her status as a mother, over and over and over, all of these things were brought up in conversations. When at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is that her life matters. Her life mattered. Her life did not have to end. She should be alive today, period. End of story. Whatever you think about her, especially white people, it is not up for debate. Black Lives Matter is not conditional, period.
Thank you. So while we are on the subject of the movement Black Lives Matter, I wanted to transition to talking more about the theme of protesting. So when coming up with the questions, we thought of, I guess, the role that social media has played in the movement thus far. So do you all think that social media activism, in quotation marks, is an effective means of activism?
Yes, without a doubt. I mean, social media is huge. I can speak to this from an empirical standpoint. So there is a perspective that engaging in social media activism is armchair activism or slacktivism. We found that that was so far from the truth. What we found was that, and we analyzed, again, over 30 million tweets over 4 major periods following the death of Mike Brown, and the non-indictment of Officer Darren Wilson, who killed him, and then the Department of Justice report that came out by Ferguson, and 1 year after Mike Brown's death. So we have a lot of data here. We found that the main spikes on Twitter corresponded to the days where we saw the most protests on the ground. That is because people, primarily people in the young demographic, are using social media to mobilize. People are using hashtags like what we just did here to share information, to cross-share information, to micro-mobilize, to create collective identities that are shared. So social media is extremely important. The speed at which People have been able to put together protests, die-ins, interstate shutdowns, would not have been able to be possible years ago without social media. Now, people still did those things, but it took a very long time for those things to organize. Right now, you all could start a hashtag and say, we're about to shut something down, and in an hour, you could shut it down. That was not possible before social media. And your generation in particular is primarily coming from my graduate students who have shown me how important social media is. And so we actually see this empirically, the impact that social media is having. I mean, Black Lives Matter, that hashtag, started on social media. It started on Facebook, then it went to Twitter, and now, of course, it's global. But we have to realize that this is not just a moment, this is a movement. And just like what happened during the Civil Rights Movement, when people didn't think that John Lewis, or whether that be the people who did the first sitting in at the restaurant, or shutting down highways and interstates should be happening, you're going to always have people telling you what you should and should not do, and that what you think is important and right is not the right thing to do. It is up to you to prove them wrong. It is up to you to say, no, I'm just not going to chase my dreams, I'm going to catch them. And part of catching my dream is creating some type of equity, and part of that includes using social media because we know it better than anybody else. You all know it way better than I do. And so part of that becomes using your skill set to make the change that you think is possible, and you all are doing that. Don't stop that. Don't let nobody tell you social media don't matter.
I think there are problems with social media activism. We have a lot of people who tweet and won't come to the ground. We have a lot of people who will protest and won't put together any type of policy. But there's no question, we don't have a spot on the media, in the white American media. If it wasn't for Twitter, if it weren't for Black Lives Matter, all these hashtags that we called upon ourselves, we wouldn't have all the attention that we've been having lately. I think that Black activists, generally, I'd say the two main groups are probably the Black Lives Matter type of movement activists and then the NAACP type who do more of the policy. We need to, as you say, use your skill set. We need to come together and make sure that we have both sides of the activism and that we are, putting together everything that we need to put together to get things done.
Make it short and sweet. This generation has been phenomenal at using a variety of social media networks in order to mobilize. But here's the thing that has become incredibly apparent to me. Everything has a cost, right? And so one of the things that has come out, I think, within the last 2 weeks is the ways in which Baltimore in particular is using facial surveillance of folks at protests to identify them for the purposes of creating an archive, right? So here we have this incredible contradiction. You can mobilize and bring hundreds, if not thousands of folks, right, at a particular moment in order to apply pressure. But what are the consequences? Because just like after the protest, you still need to live. And you don't know who is collecting your data, you don't know who is going to be using that information, and you don't have access to it, especially in light of the sort of satellite surveillance and drone surveillance that's taking place. So I want us to be mindful, right, of the possibilities, but we always have to count the cost and pay attention to the limitations as well.
Thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to transition to talk a little bit about college students and what steps can we take to, I guess, move past this movement of we're just going to protest on social media. What's next for college students, or what are some of your advice points that you can give us?
I think there are multiple aspects of the movement, and I think we're really focusing on the protests and the policy side. But I think that's like focusing on like politicians and soldiers versus like the general population. They go out and create the space and change the world, change perceptions, and fight for a different world. The rest of us, what we have to do is make them proud, generally speaking. And I say make them proud by why were lives sacrificed? Why are people on the ground? Why are people staying up all night on the streets yelling Black Lives Matter? And they're doing it for you. They're doing it for us. We are doing it for us. And so I think it's up to college students to really make that leap that says and kind of goes against the grain of what we've been told, that it's really hard for us to do this. Black millennials aren't going to be able to do this. It's going to be so much more difficult for this. Well, these movements are opening up lanes for us to be great, in essence. And I think what college students need to do outside of protesting, outside of the social media game, outside of pushing policies, creating policies, I think that everyday individual needs to attempt to know, one, that they can be great, that there's people out there fighting for them to be great, at whatever it is that you want to do, and to really go for it. I think that's what we can do, especially as college students. One thing I realized when I was here, I stopped caring about, and I'm not encouraging this at all, but I stopped caring about my grades my sophomore year. Because my brother was about 3 years, he's about 3 years older than me, and all his friends graduated, had great GPAs, but were still looking for jobs. Because while they were focused on getting a good GPA, they didn't do anything. You know what I mean? They stayed in the room, they got grades. And I mean, I know it's different if you want to go pre-med or you want to go to law school, you got to get that GPA, you got to take that test, you got to get in your graduate program. I understand that. But that's not the entire population. And even then, your experience is so important. Your college experience is so important. I mean, I think I started an orchestra here, y'all. I'm a sociology major, and the only thing I did was kick myself in the pool. You asked me, like, how did you learn how to conduct? I had to. And I'm just now recently seeing, like, how far, I guess, my skill set just in conducting has grown. Because I used to be awkward as hell, just like flapping. One of my coworkers just makes a joke that says he flapped for a living, and I'm like, whatever. But I noticed that when I had another member step up and conduct, how in my head I was telling him and giving him advice, and 3 years ago I wouldn't be able to do that, you know what I mean? But it's not because somebody taught me, it's not because my grades were good, it's not because, you know what I'm saying, I showed up to every class. It was because I made the decision to do something else, to do something for me, do something that I love. And I'm blessed enough to have gotten support to go from a lunch table to the Kennedy Center. But in the meantime, the HHO is responsible for me getting this job, the job that I have right now. Because in interviews, whether it's over the phone or in person, explain to me your role in the hip hop orchestra. Explain to me how it is that you came about creating this. Explain to me all the experiences that you had. Explain to me the knowledge that you gained in doing the orchestra. And doing things that you don't know how to do, you learn things that you didn't even know existed. You learn whether it's how to conduct, you learn how to run a student organization, you learn organizational skills, you learn management skills, you learn communication skills. Those are all concrete, hard skills that you can take into a job. You can't sit at a you can't expect to sit at a desk alongside tens of millions of other people right now. Right now, there are millions of students in a classroom or in a ballroom or in their dorm rooms studying to get that GPA. What the hell else are you doing? And that to me was why I went to college. What are you have all these resources. UMD has so many resources that they're fighting other student organizations and other organizations just so you can come to the office and get them. And it's not about music or just plainly, but it's about other things that you want to do. OMC office or OMSC office. The student suite is lit now. Like, what? There's just so many resources out here for you. And for those, as well as for those who are protesting, as well as for those who are organizing. Like, we're here on a panel. Marilyn Mosby was just here, y'all. Like, we're so close, but you're not taking advantage of that by just going to class. You're not taking advantage of that by not doing that extra thing, by not taking that risk, by not trying to be the person that you don't know how to be. You're never going to get there if you never kick yourself in the pool, you know what I mean? Like, you'll never get there if you just stay in class. So I definitely encourage good grades, but I encourage you to do something else, please God. Like, just get out of class, like do something. Do something that's never been done before. Do something that scares you. Do something that doesn't have a blueprint. Because that's the only thing change, progress is gonna happen. That's the only way we're gonna push the perceptions of us, by being something other than what has already been done before. And that's my piece.
That was good.
I think.
Sorry. No, go ahead.
No,
you go ahead. I can go after. Go
No.
ahead.
Dr. Ray, go ahead.
All right. Okay. So a few things. Yeah. So college, one thing you don't realize is you're gonna probably have the most fun you're gonna ever have in your life in college. That's the first thing. I hope I look young, but I'm like old enough to be like y'all's daddy, like literally. But I hope that I still look young. But part of that is right. You'll have fun, but you will also gain friends that you will have for life. Part of that means you want to grow with them over time. So I want to give you just a couple of examples, and I'm going to try and make this short and sweet. First thing, what he just described, he essentially described one of my buddies from graduate school, who now is in Arizona and runs the music program for several counties in Arizona. And started up an orchestra in college. So that is what I hear when he talks, is a person 15 years out at that point, in terms of the change he's making for thousands of students through music, because that's his passion. Because he didn't just chase his dreams, he figured out how to go catch them. See, that's one of the biggest things. Things pop in our head all the time that we get a little scared of, because we don't see the end, and we're like, oh, I don't know about that. Or, if you're religious, you're like, oh, God put something in my head. Or if you're not, you're like, oh, I saw something through some clouds. I'm just saying. You see part of the stairwell, you see part of the bridge, but you can't see it all. Take that first step. So when I hear you talking, I hear Kurt, who not only has his music program, but still has a house in Bloomington, Indiana that he rents out to black students. He's making change in multiple places. Some of my friends from college recently started up something. You all should go to it. It's called Doc Your Change. DOCYOUR Change. It's a platform where you can go and you can start to continue to change the narrative about black people. That allows you to post information about the positive things you are doing in your community that get overlooked all the time. The stuff that the news should actually be about. The small things that you're doing, whether it be buying a kid some food who doesn't have enough when you at the store, whether it be like what my family did the other day, where it was a little boy who came out of Chipotle and didn't know where the person was who was riding with him. So we waited with him for 20 minutes until we gave him the phone. He called his mom, called the people to come back and get him. We didn't have to do that. These are small things that we're doing for our communities that we know are important and need to be highlighted. Yes, you definitely need to do things out of school. Degrees matter, so your grades matter. And part of that means you want to really think about going to graduate school. It's extremely difficult to get the kind of job and have the kind of autonomy that you might want to have with a bachelor's degree in this market. When I was coming out, people could do that, but you all can't do that now, so you really need to think that way. Finally, there are 24 hours in a day. Use them all. Oftentimes, we don't use them. The way I feel, I can sleep when I'm dead, right? So literally, that's how I feel. Now, so oftentimes I'm forced to sleep. And I'm like, okay, I have to go to sleep. But the thing is that use the 24 hours in a day. Find what you are passionate about. Follow your dreams. Don't run away from them. And be innovative. What was the statement you said? You said something like, blueprint. What you say about a blueprint? Yeah, do something that doesn't have a blueprint. That's awesome.
So, I think that in order to figure out how to make your contribution that you are going to make in the world, is that you have to have an idea of what people did who came before you, right? With that being said, I always encourage young people to read anything from anyone that has been written around social justice organizing in the last 50 or 100 years. It literally doesn't matter. For the purpose of doing this is to figure out how people organized or did any sort of social justice agitation work prior to this moment. For instance, my friends and I often talk about how did folks do organizing during the civil rights movement without social media? No, seriously, where were those communication networks? What did they look like, right? Because up until, 20 years ago, you couldn't make a long distance call without it being like $2 a minute or something egregious. That's the first thing. This is the second thing. The third is that every person in this room is a genius and has a contribution to make. Oftentimes, folks look at people who have national recognition as sort of the position to embody. But there's different kinds of people that run a community. There's different kinds of variety of different kinds of people that run a city, that run a state. We need pediatricians. We need teachers. We need pilots. We need people who build rocket ships. We need every single last one of you to figure out the thing that it is that you are meant to do and to work together in order to do it.
In that vein, I think that it's a misconception that activism and protesting and being an abolitionist is a singular action. It doesn't mean going out in the streets all the time. It doesn't mean putting on some kind of caustic shirt to make a point. It doesn't mean making a sign or joining a hashtag all the time. You can be an abolitionist in any situation. In whatever field that you choose, in whatever action that you are taking, you can change the way you do that action to make change in the world. That's in any situation. Whoever you're surrounded by, no matter how mundane you think the activity is, I believe that if you think deep enough and hard enough about that action, you can change it to have some kind of positive impact.
Really briefly, the question was a while ago, but a part of it was about young people and policies. One of the things that we need is for kind of the rest of the country to realize that we have a voice that matters. Like, for example, President Obama, he got a lot for being too young at like 40 to have a voice. We have a lot to say. All these issues with tuition and the environment, they wouldn't be a problem if we had some type of direct voice in government. One of my most disappointing experience with NAACP last year, we planned an event where we invited local politicians to kind of meet and greet, to come and meet us, have a nice chill environment where we could speak and exchange ideas. It was so hard at first to get them to come. We got a lot of, who else is coming? Like, they wouldn't come until their competitors were coming. They were asking to see who else was there. When one office came, the rest of them would come. They would see who's coming. If a certain person wasn't there, they sent someone instead. People just don't really value the young voice like they should. So I don't really know the answer to how we can get everybody to recognize that we have such an important perspective, but that is definitely necessary.
Thank you. So I want to touch on a point. This is my own personal question. Ms. Jarmon, you talked about methods of the past. So I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on nowadays millennials, as some people call us. We are trying to come up with ways to boycott. Do you think that that is an effective method for us to attempt? If so, how do you think we should go about doing that? Anyone else can answer as well, in addition.
I think that an effective strategy has more than one tool in the toolbox, meaning that boycotting is one, right? Running local people for your city council is another. Being present in whatever social institutions you have nearby is another. Listening to young people and inviting them into the conversation and listening to them at the very beginning of your process, and not as social dressing for photo opportunities, right? Not for photo ops. Because the thing that I understand, I was trained to be an organizer in San Francisco 15, 20 years ago. One of the things that they taught us to do in terms of understanding our voices was to push back against San Francisco building a youth prison. They told us, we will train you in terms of dealing with this institution spending money, right, on a prison versus education. And we see in California right now, in terms of the documentary that just came out, we see more spending in California as well as across the country on prisons as well, rather than educational opportunities. So you have to have more than one tool in the toolbox, right? And quite honestly, you have to be willing to do the work. And the last thing I would say that guides pretty much everything that I do, not necessarily in terms of methods, but ideas, we are the ones we have been waiting for. June Jordan said it in 1977, and I believe it now. No one is going to rescue you. You have to do it yourself.
On that tip, especially in the social media age, at least when it comes to boycotting, I think we have this unnecessary tendency to just talk about stuff when we don't want to give it attention, especially on social media. So if there's something that you want to boycott, or if there's something that you just think should, falter or just make its way out of your circle, stop talking about it. Stop giving it attention. Every time you talk about it, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram puts that into their algorithm. And it makes it more present in yours and your social network's online presence. Stop talking about it. Like, whether it's Kim Kardashian or anybody, stop talking about it. Or like, what I'm saying? Meet up with your people in person. Because the internet tracks your voice. On the internet, your voice matters as a statistic in an algorithm that either proves or disproves it and perpetuates or doesn't what it is that you say, everything that you click. So please make a conscious effort to just leave things lie, or leave things where they lie, at least on the internet. And if you want to boycott something on the internet and you want to, spread the message of the boycott, do that. Do that. Spread that boycott message. But stop feeding the wrong wolf. I don't know if y'all seen Tomorrowland, it's a pretty good movie. But stop feeding the wrong wolf, because when you do, it keeps it going, it keeps it in your face, it keeps barking. Just turn around, let it go, let it die.
Boycotting works. In 13th, you talked about the Corrections Corporation of America.
Yes.
At one point in that film, an entire bed of logos is listed of all of the organizations and companies that have invested and supported Corrections Corporation of America. I went back in Netflix and I freeze that frame and I wrote down all of them. A lot of them pulled out and no longer support the Corrections Corporations of America because they are afraid of boycotts. It works. Equally important to boycotts is also identifying businesses and companies that you can invest in, because everybody still needs their needs fulfilled. So if you're going to boycott certain things, also offer opportunities to other organizations and corporations who are doing good work, who are better deserving of your money. Boycotts are powerful. They're already afraid of you. They already pulled out of this particular organization because they were afraid. It's not some little thing, just because you stop purchasing a certain thing, it doesn't make it a little thing. Big corporations are afraid of that. Use it.
Thank you. So now we're going to transition to talking about some more things that are focused on the solution side. So one of the questions that we came up with as an executive board was, how can we as people and as college students hold institutions and authorities accountable?
Call them out. Call them out straight up. I think it's what you were saying. They're afraid of the boycott. They're afraid of the voice. You know what I mean? They're afraid of our power as consumers. Call them out. Straight up, call them out. If you want to go the legal route, hit up Ms. Mosby. I don't know if that's the way to go straight to the state attorney. But mobilize, call them out, mobilize, boycott, protest, get in their faces, hurt their business. That's the only thing they really care about. And that's why we're the ones hurt, because they don't care about us. They care about their money, they care about their business. Hit them in their pockets.
So, first thinking about that last question, there are a couple of websites I want to give out that I think are important One of the things I try to do is I travel quite a bit for work, giving lectures and going to conferences and things, and I always search two websites. One is weekbyblack.com, so there's weekbyblack.com, and the other is purchaseblack.com. What it allows you to do is essentially search local areas to find black-owned businesses. Businesses for everything, places to eat, places to get services, places to do anything that you might want to do. So when you travel, then you can actually support black businesses, because I mean, boycotts definitely work, and so then you have to have alternatives that I think are extremely important, because we shouldn't consider black businesses alternatives, we should consider them the norm. And part of the problem is that we don't do that enough. In terms of holding social institutions accountable, say like higher education institutions, you want to, so one of the things that's happened on this campus that I've been really proud of is that each college is now starting to do these Black Lives Matter support pictures. So I think Business did one, BSOS did one, and I'm sure there are others coming that I heard that are scheduled. Now what you all need to do is get together and figure out what you all want. And so it's not just enough to do these photo ops. I mean, that's great. Like, black fist in the air, people throwing up their Greek signs, all that stuff is hot. I like it. But what do you all want? It's like what Marilyn Mosley was saying. What seat do you want at the table? Do you want more black professors? Okay, you can ask for that. Do you want a more diverse range of options for certain types of opportunities that might be available? You can ask for that. And part of it isn't just asking, part of it is demanding. Do you want to have other research opportunities to do some of the things that you might be interested in? You all can get that. So part of it in holding institutions accountable is realizing that people follow the money. What do you all pay? Tuition money. Here at the University of Maryland, Maryland has the most black students of any flagship university in the country. Now, part of that means Maryland should, because Maryland is also in the most affluent black county in the country. So when I see that the black student population is around 15 to 18%, I'm like, that's not enough. Because when I look at the county, I see a much higher percentage of affluent black people. So part of that means you can make certain demands and actually have those demands met. And this is the time. See, what you gotta realize about moments like this, when it's kind of like a match. You know, when you strike a match, you only got a certain amount of time before it goes out. And oftentimes with the issues we're dealing with, when the match is lit, that means white people are paying attention. They don't pay attention often. Now, you can get them to pay attention all the time, but they don't pay attention often. And right now, they're paying attention. And they don't know what to do. Tell them what to do. Tell them what you want. Strike while the match is lit, and then when that one goes out, figure out how to strike another one. Because if you don't do that, then you don't hold people accountable. So when I look at this room, I get that it's NAACP, and this is great. I think everything that goes on, we're having a conversation among us, and we see some non-blacks in this room, and I love that. But there are other forms where a lot of the things I do on campus, I see very homogenous groups. I go to speak to this one group and it's all white students. I go to another group and it's all black students. And I get how that happens because your friends also look like you. And so I get that. But if we actually want to change this, we need to be at tables where decisions are being made. And when I go to the dean's office to go speak about something and I walk in a room and of the 15 people that are there, 12 are white men, now you know what happens? I'm at that table speaking for all of you. So you all now need to let me know what you want so that I can also help you do that. And part of what happens to me as a faculty member, I don't come into contact with enough of you all on a regular basis. So when people ask me what students are doing, I don't know. Now that doesn't mean I'm gonna come to everything because I got 2 little kids and a lot of things happen outside of school, but what that does mean is I can advocate for you. So you have to let us know. And you have to search us out. There are black faculty on this campus, actually a much higher percentage than in other places, and several of you all do this. So again, in many respects, I'm speaking to the choir. This conversation might be for you to talk to your friend who's not here. But part of this becomes there are things we can do. You can make demands. You don't just have to sit at this table. Put yourselves at other tables where people are making decisions.
Just to back off that, just to utilize this space in a double way, why don't we take it to Twitter? Why don't you all tweet using the hashtag what needs to change for black students at UMD?
Boom.
I would also add, white people, I see you in the back. There are several of you here. There are also non-black students here who are also in support, which I'm also very happy to see. Don't throw up your hands and just say, a black person did not tell me what to do, so I'm not going to do anything yet. Racism is no mystery. It's not something that is something that you have to figure out in some way. When you hear it, you know it. Call it out. It's not something you need permission for. It is something that you should be standing up for and doing. When you are in other spaces other than this one, when you are surrounded by other people and you hear something that is not okay. If you notice that you are in a homogeneous space and you're like, why aren't there any other people who don't look like me in the space? Ask why that is. Ask the people in power of that space why that is. You can be an advocate too. You can help change those things too. Part of making those steps is educating yourself. So that's one big reason I'm glad to see you here. Coming here and listening and taking notes. Take some notes. Taking notes is a great way to learn and to grow. But racism is no mystery. If you see it and you hear it, do something about it. If you're seeing homogeneous spaces, do something about it. Ask about it. Ask the questions. Be the annoying person in the room. The only reason I'm at this table is because I was the annoying person in the room. That's it. I have no other qualifications other than that.
Not true.
I want to add to that, speaking from what I think is a very unique perspective. In the HHO, a lot of the majority of the instrumentalists are white, and the MCs, my vocalists, are black. And one, I'm not going to dive deep into that issue, but it speaks on how the lack of arts programs in black schools, and I guess whatever schools feed into Maryland, UMD. But the other thing is, I had, after the Colin Kaepernick thing, which is kind of what got me here in the first place, I wanted to get the HHO together with a few other performance groups and perform the full national anthem, or at least the one that we know with that stanza in a public space, so that people know truly and personally what it is that Colin Kaepernick and a lot of other people around this country are sitting and kneeling for. But in pitching that idea to the HHO, that was fun. One, I didn't know how many people didn't know what was going on, so I had to completely explain the entire situation, context and all. Two, I had to deal with some students, and I don't shame them for this at all, but I had to deal with some students' hesitations in being a part of something like that. Jumping forward, it didn't happen, it fizzled out, and we never got as organized as we should have, and I'll put that on myself. But in these spheres where you are maybe the only minority, where you may be the only one educated on the subject and to whatever level, you need to know that you have the responsibility to address it, to explain it, to, in some way, shape, or form, tolerate ignorance from those who are seeking to be educated. Answering the questions, being the teacher to those who want to know, to those who may not even want to know, but who are in earshot. And it's uncomfortable. You may not even feel like you're the one that's supposed to do this. You may wish somebody else was in there with you. But there are times when you don't have a choice. And I think more times than that, you do. And I think more times than that, you don't make that choice. And I just want to encourage everyone here, whether it's your white friends or any non-black friends, or even your black friends who just don't care. Sad to say that exists. I think you have a responsibility as leaders in your community. You're here because you either want to be a leader, or you want to inspire a leader, or you're bringing leaders here. it's your responsibility to communicate what is happening from the Black perspective, to encourage others to participate, to support. Black people are still only 7% of this country. I think white people make up 65%. And just speaking in sheer numbers, if this was a ground war, I'm talking like medieval times, war, not nukes and shit. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Speaking with like just straight hands, we are powerful, but we are not immune to hubris. And I say that to say that there are other people around us who may not be in this room, who may be in this room, who can help, who want to help, who don't know how to help. And I think there's a certain hesitation in Black activism where it becomes this a prideful act to stand up for Black people, in the sense that it goes too far, that we don't let others help. And we look down on those in white spheres, even if they were born there. And I think that is as regressive as it gets. The whole point of the Black Lives Matter movement is to show that we are part of this world the same way that America perceives itself as this great nation that runs the world and not a part of the international community. That type of supremacy. I don't want the Black Lives Matter to move into that realm. I think the point of the Black Lives Matter movement is to show the world that we are a part of the world, that we are humanity. We represent humanity, we can represent humanity, and we do it every day. And I want us to be the ones who are inclusive in that, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's sexual orientation. I think the movement will benefit from just the sheer numbers of dropping a Black supremacist viewpoint. I'm happy as hell to be Black. I'm proud. I love it. You know what I'm saying? And I want others to see that. I want y'all to feel that way. But I don't want it to turn into this too prideful. We don't need no help. We can do this ourselves. We can, but we don't have to. We really don't have to. Especially not 7% of an entire country. 13? My bad. 13%. My point is we don't have to do this alone. Educate, open up, and be there for those who just don't know yet.
All right, thank you so much. So now we're going to transition to the part of the program where it's more audience engagement, because I can see some of you all getting restless. So I'm going to introduce our PR chair. Her name is Miss Kamani Brown. You can clap for her if you want. And Kamani is responsible for our Twitter talks that we usually have. So she's going to read some of the questions that you all have asked, hopefully, from Twitter, and we can direct them to our panelists.
Good evening. Again, I'm Kamani Brown. I currently serve as the public relations representative for the UMCP chapter of NAACP. In her absence, I want to again thank our keynote speaker, our 5 panelists, and each of you for being here with us this evening. Again, the hashtag is SBL2K16, so as I'm reading, if you come up with a question, do ask your question via Twitter. So one of our first questions, and any of the panelists can answer unless specifically, unless someone specified which person they wanted to answer the question. So our question that we'll start with is, do you think the Obama administration has done enough to support the Black Lives Matter movement?
No. I mean, so this is the deal. You know, what we've seen, I mean, I think we have to put this in context. So first off, no, the Obama administration hasn't done enough. I think what has happened, though, is that there were a lot of people who felt that electing a black president who was highly qualified, because that becomes important because there are some people like, we elected a black president, and so now we don't have to talk about race anymore. Well, unfortunately, what happened is that we saw the racist head of America come out even more. It wasn't that it was gone by any means. It was just that it came out even more. And this happened to coincide with the Great Recession, as we call it, which was the largest economic downfall and downturn of America since the Great Depression that happened in 1929 when the stock market crashed and unemployment reached over 40%. Okay? So that's why it's called the Great Recession, not the Great Depression. So part of that coinciding now means that there were some whites who started perceiving minorities as being a bigger group threat than they otherwise might have thought us to be. When you perceive another group as a threat, as a group threat, there are three things that happen. First, you perceive they're going to take your jobs. Second, you perceive that they are going to mess up your education. And third, you believe that they're going to change the cultural way of life. Just think about those broad themes and what's happening now. This is what it's all about. Mexicans taking jobs, right? Colin Kaepernick don't want to stand for the flag, and you should support the flag because this is inherently American, when we don't realize that the federal government was paying the NFL to actually put flags on the field. Like, nobody really talked about that. If you don't know about that, you really need to look that up. This wasn't something they were doing just to be trying to celebrate America. The country felt that it was good after 9/11 to galvanize people, and they felt NFL games was the best way to do it. So the federal government started paying the NFL to have the Star Spangled Banner played and that big flag before every game. They didn't do that before 9/11. All that stuff is new. But for your generation, you grew up with that because it's been going on for 15 years. So you thought it's always happened. It hasn't. So getting back to Obama, no, he hasn't done enough. And part of that means if people voted for him in droves, then we need to hold him accountable for certain things that are going on. Now, I do think that eventually affordable, first off, the Affordable Care Act is helping black and brown people, without a doubt. The problem is that it's also increasing premiums, which has to do with the health insurance companies, not necessarily the Affordable Care Act, but people can't necessarily disentangle those two. What Obama has done, though, is, and this is the interesting thing people don't know, Obama has mentioned race in his talks the least of any president over the past half century. The least of any president. Now, does that mean that when he mentions it, it doesn't have a big impact? No, but in terms of mentions, that hasn't happened. But we've seen these watershed moments, whether that be him saying in Trayvon Martin, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon. I mean, that was a big moment. That was coming directly from him. The other thing to pay attention to, and this should just give you all some context for what's happening in Washington. When President Obama writes his own speeches, that's when we normally hear race. You know, they have writers. So after, I think after Philando was killed, his speech writers came to him and he was like, no, I'm writing my own speech. And they were like, well, do you want us to look at it? He was like, no, I don't need anybody to look at this for me. When he was on the campaign trail and gave that great speech about the history of race in America, that all came from him. So part of this is realizing that politics is a machine, and yes, he is in the head and at the forefront, but he is still part of a machine. Part of that machine means making things go on as usual, which means continuing to allow racism to be a pillar of our country without addressing it. So that means if you want to address it, it might be difficult to do that with inside the system, but we still need the spook who sat by the door. So if you haven't read that book, you should read it. Essentially about a CIA operative who they felt they were planting, who the federal government felt like they were planting within the black community, but instead he was planted by the black community to go and investigate the CIA. It's a great book. The point is saying all that, of course, Obama hasn't done enough. And we need to hold our politicians accountable, which includes not just Obama, but our local politicians. So this thing when I hear you have an event and local politicians don't want to come, that's a problem. They need to be put on blast for that. And there are ways to do that through social media and other means to hold people accountable. It shouldn't be about who's here, who's not there. So people shouldn't get your vote just because of their name or because of their skin color. Instead, they should get your vote because they have policies that align with the things that you believe in is going to lead us to more equity.
Yeah, I totally agree. No, he has not done enough. Now, there are a lot of people who say he hasn't done anything. That's false. It's pretty clear that what he's done has been indirectly try to make change, affordable care, that's for us. The things that he's done within the prison system, that was for us. It's funny, I was joking with my Uber driver like last week about this same question, and I was like, we were waiting, we were like, okay, maybe when he gets reelected, he has to get the second term, we were waiting for the lame duck period, and I'm like, okay, now we're waiting for him to get out of office, I want to see him throw up the fist, I want to see Michelle bust out the afro, all of that. And he replied, that would incite a whole civil war. He's kind of right about that, but the fact of the matter, Black America, we put him in office. We took our black hand and we placed him in office. He would absolutely not be there if it wasn't for us and our rap songs and our mobilizing like we never have before. We put him there. So we needed to see some direct mentions and some direct policies that say our name explicitly. The most disappointing part of his office was when he said all lives matter. I thought that was a huge slap in the face. So the answer is no. I have so much respect for Barack Obama. He's one of my favorite people, but no, he has not.
Okay, our next question. Looking forward to the future, what are ways that we can ease relations between communities and the police force?
So one of the things that we're doing here is we have a large-scale project with the Prince George's County Police Department. And it's myself and Dr. Chris Marsh, who I'm sure some of you all know. If you haven't taken a course with her, you should. She's a professor in sociology. And what we are doing is we are doing implicit bias training with all 1,700 officers in Prince George's County. Prince George's County has one of the largest police departments in the country. So we're going to be doing implicit bias training with them. We've already started. It'll go through 2018, so this is a 2-year project. We are also evaluating their body-worn camera program. If you didn't know, Prince George's County, as of next month, will have body-worn cameras on officers. Phase 1 will be about 70 officers, and then they will get about another 250 or 500 over the next year. And hopefully, I think they have a 3 to 5 year rollout for all officers to be outfitted with body cameras. Now, there are definitely some issues with body cameras. So research shows if officers can control turning them on and off, then it doesn't change much of the outcomes. But if police officers can't control turning them on and off, it actually does lead to less claims of harassment and less brutality. The other thing we need, I was talking to, I think someone was sitting over there who might have went to the restroom, that we need to really get back to community policing. Part of this means people need to live where they work if you're a police officer. Part of the problem is that people work in completely different places and then come to police our communities. Instead, we need people to live in our communities. It should actually be mandated that if you're a police officer, if you choose to do that, because their job is extremely difficult, and I have police officers in my family, but if you're going to do that, you need to live where you work. You don't need to live 30 minutes or 45 miles away and then come and police my neighborhood because you don't know anybody here. So part of it is dealing with community relations to actually build that up. So in short, what I'm saying is, I don't think the onus is on us to change this. Because like I did in my talk earlier at 4 o'clock, I asked people, has your family had that talk? Raise your hand if your family has had that talk about what you do with the police. Of course, basically everybody in here has their hand raised because basically everybody in here is black. What that means is black people are the most compliant people when we interact with the police. We don't need to change anything. The police needs to change how they treat us, and that doesn't deal with us, that deals with them.
Our next question, as a black woman, is it our responsibility to educate white men that we work with about racism, police brutality, and inequality?
Well,
That is a good question. Is it our responsibility? No. Is it helpful to be a pioneer an educator on behalf of your community? Yes. I work in one of my jobs, I was talking to Colin about this, a very Republican law firm where they have all types of things to say about everything that greatly offends me. And those individuals have learned a lot by having the Black friend who explains things to them. It should not be our responsibility, but I think that you can make a difference if you choose to take on that role. That is, it goes into the whole issue of respectability politics. It's a very unfortunate situation that we're in, but there's nothing wrong with education. That's my answer.
Dealing with racism and dealing with racialized sexism is exhausting. Full stop. And so what I see happening online in a lot of young people's communities are conversations around self-care. If you do not take care of yourself, right, you will find yourself ill. So the issue in terms of being a teacher in any regard, right, if you choose to make it a profession or if you find yourself being the only Black person at in your workplace, is that it entails doing something that a lot of people don't have the name for, right? But it's a real thing, and it's called emotional labor. It's why when you're at work and you're talking about racism and you're talking about sexism, or something has happened, right, and you can't talk about it at work, so you have to keep it inside. It takes a toll on you. So one of the things that I want to encourage for those of you who do engage, right, in being that one person at work, is to take care of yourself. Because I can tell you, personally, when you wind up in the hospital, right, those people at that job are not going to be the ones who come and check for you.
That's exactly what I was hoping that someone would say. Self-care is so important. When you do this work and you really do it, and this is the thing about really doing it, you can really do it without ever attending some kind of protest or rally. You can do it at your job every single day. Because again, the thing you all don't realize, when you leave Maryland, Maryland does not look like the rest of the country. You may get a job where you are the only person of color. Or it might be one more, and they don't like the fact that you're there because they think it's only one Black spot. That's what you have to be prepared for. Just to briefly tell you, when I got in grad school at Indiana, I told you the demographics. But my first week there, went to Waffle House, they didn't serve my grandma coffee, and she was a diabetic. I got pulled over for not having my seatbelt on, busting a block on campus. It was like me going from Stamp to like the tennis courts, or what used to be the tennis courts. Like, really, I get a ticket for driving? Like, so you all get the dynamics of what was going on here. There was a noose hanging down the street. These were the dynamics that I was dealing with. And it was cold, and I'm from the South, and I don't deal with cold weather. And it's really cold in the Midwest. In short, I went from basically the size I am now to 60 pounds heavier within about a span of 15 months. I was stressed out. I was doing so much emotional labor. I was exhausted. And I said, either I'm going to get control of my life or I'm going to die. And we know that Black people die early. Tommy from Martin just died. This dude wasn't old. To you all, he might be old, but he wasn't that old. He wasn't old enough to die. And so part of doing self-care, let me tell you what you do. First, you have to eat healthy. Eating healthy is important. Second, you have to exercise. Third, you have to laugh. Get around people who make you smile. Get around people who appreciate you. And if you want to do that type of emotional labor, then figure out how to let it go. I have two main strategies. When I interact with somebody who I'm not going to see again, I roast them on the spot. I have to get this off my brain. So if I go to a store and somebody discriminates against me, don't mess with my wife and kids. You got a real problem. It's just a no-no. So I deal with it right then on the spot. I go home, I write a letter to corporate, I let you know how racist you are. That's the first thing I do. Because that's important, because I don't want anything back. Normally they send stuff back, but I don't really want anything back. Well, I'm doing two things. First, I'm putting you on watch that you a problem. And because this information goes to the EEOC, which is something else you can report it to. Second, I get it out of my brain. Because when you deal with discrimination, you keep that inside of you. And so the second thing I do, though, if it's a person who I'm going to see again, I wait like a cat. You know how cats wait? and then they like get you like later. And let me give you an example. So I did a postdoc at Berkeley before coming here. I already had a job here, and then came here 2 years later. So I'd already been a faculty member here, but I wasn't physically here. I'm walking around the building, our sociology building one day, and I should say the Parent J. Mitchell Art Sociology building, because I could have gave that story about how institutional change comes about. And I'm walking around reading the paper, and this guy comes out of his office and he says, "Oh, they went that way." And I was like, "What? Who?" He's like, "The maintenance guys. You with the maintenance guys, right?" No, I'm not. Now, I didn't have on a tie, but I had on slacks and a polo. Those dudes had on blue jumpers. I'm like, what? And so then I kept doing my work. I went walking. I was like, no. And I saw all the guys were black. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna wait like a cat. 2-3 months go by. So my colleagues and I were going to lunch, and this guy comes up and they're like, "Oh, have you met Rayshawn? You know, he's a new faculty member here. He's now physically here." And he goes, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" And I shake his hand. I pulled my hand back. I was like, "I know you. Oh yeah, you're the guy who confused me for the maintenance guys." Everybody's all awkward. Like, I don't feel awkward in this moment. Because see, when racial incidents happen, we the only ones feeling awkward. Other people going on about their business like they're okay. It's the same thing with gender. Men get away with saying sexy stuff all the time and leave thinking everything is okay, and women sitting there dealing with that. Race is doing the same thing. You can't let people get away with that. You have to take control of your bodies and your minds. And so if you're in this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. What you all are doing right now is really one of the first steps in preparing you for life in terms of dealing with white supremacy. It is different when you're here compared to other places. You want to talk to people on how to get ready. I'm telling you, 4 years from now, you're going to look up, you're going to be sitting on your couch, you're going to gain 30 pounds, you're going to say, "I remember that dude at that NAACP event was telling me, man, that I need to get ready." And that is going to be your moment when you need to realize you need to make change. Self-care is real.
I want to highlight that tip, especially for artists. Incredibly, I myself, I'm very sensitive, and I define an artist as somebody who feels so much that they can't really articulate it with words. So they use, it's whatever art form you choose. Mine happens to be music. But the reason I started, one of the reasons why I started the HHO is because I was going through a rough time, and this was it was my way out. But self-care is so important. Mental health is so important. Especially for those who are actually actively engaged in these everyday situations where there's this social distance between you and people of not color, where you have to explain this. And I think what you were saying before, I want to go back to what I was saying about reaching out to others. I had considered that in what I was saying, and I definitely want to, piggyback off of that. It's incredibly important. Take care of yourself. Please, please, please take care of yourself, or else you'll find yourself in a really dark place. And a place that you'll have to start an orchestra to get out of. And I don't want that. I don't wish that on any of you.
There's a major concern with activists creating policy change, but how are we supposed to do so with the system working against us?
Can you restate that? I'm sorry.
There's a major concern with activists creating policy change, but how are we supposed to do so with the system working against us?
The system has always been working against us. And we've done all this so far. So it goes back to looking at what the people have done before us and emulating that.
Sorry. Go ahead.
One thing that, I'm just going to repeat something somebody else said. One thing that DeRay is often fond of saying is, it will take all of us to win. So, yes, the system is rigged. Yes, the system is working against you. It will take people inside the system. It will take people outside the system. It will take people who are affected by the system and recording what happens when they're affected by the system to win. So, yes, the system is working against you, and it will take everyone to fix it.
Okay. For those who have graduated, what advice do you have for them in terms of getting involved? It is easy to feel like just a number.
I would say that the first thing with regard to becoming involved is quite honestly, is counterintuitive. You actually need to figure out how to be around people who think nothing like you. Because your emotional development and your political imagination will be shaped by folks who challenge you, right? So in some ways, it doesn't seem like it makes sense, but some of my best thoughts have been coming from the perspectives of all people, libertarians, right? No, seriously, I remember having conversations with them and us feeling like as colleagues, how ideologically we were both on the margins, but we were able to have conversations. And I remember in particular having a really big disagreement with a white male colleague at the time, with him having such an overinvestment, right, in his belief in legal change and the law. And I was just like, dude, I'm a black woman, right? You are gonna have a different relationship to policy and the laws and its implementation in comparison to me. But it kept me on my toes, right? And it's important to be able to be challenged, right? And oh my goodness, please be mindful of not running away from contradictions. Oftentimes I hear students say, well, that's a contradiction. Well, we can't do that. You are always going to run into a contradiction. In fact, the knottier the contradiction, the closer you are to a solution. The knottier the contradiction, the closer you are to a solution. So you have to push through.
Our last question is actually addressed to Dr. Ray. Do the circulated videos of Black people brutalized by police help, or are they just traumatizing and dehumanizing?
Yeah, great question. I'm sure this may be coming. So before this event, I gave a lecture with the Baha'i Chair for World Peace, and at the beginning of the lecture, I showed a series of recent incidents involving blacks and whites who interact with the police, and I've never done that before, actually. Normally, I speak through them, but I felt that it was important to have, so what I did was I was showing an incident of a white person doing something, and then a black person doing something, and of course the outcome was that a black person ended up either meeting their demise or was shot by the police, and the white person might have been fighting back at the police or doing these sorts of other things, and nothing really happened to them in that moment. And I've never done that before. Part of doing that today was because rarely do we juxtapose what happens to white people and what happens to black people. White people know what happens to white people because they're white. Black people know what happens to black people because they're black. We think we know what happens to the other group, but rarely do we actually see it. And so the images and videos we have allow us to see it, but normally we don't see it in tandem. So, like, one question I got after my lecture earlier today was, what do you say to people who say that Black Lives Matter doesn't talk about black on black crime, we never see black on black crime? I was like, we see black on black crime every day at 5 o'clock when you watch the news. They show images of black people committing crime, and they're normally doing it against somebody else who's black. And when they show a white person, they're normally doing it against somebody else who's white. So crime is actually intraracial. 94% of crime that black people commit is committed against black people, and 86% of crime that white people commit is committed against white people. And so part of that is realizing that. Do I think that it's still important to show it? Yes, because I think there are about a third of whites really embrace color blindness, meaning they think race doesn't matter. And this is the interesting thing. For their attitudes, they really do embody color blindness. Like, there are a third of whites who really embrace that, who live their lives that way. The problem is they don't think that there are another 2/3 of white people who don't. And that is what these videos show them. They're like, I never knew black people got treated like that. I'll give you an example. I wrote a piece, I don't remember if it was the Huffington Post piece or something for Public Radio International, and I put in a statement about how I've been pulled over 30 times by the police and brutalized by the police. And I said, you know, I shouldn't have to say this, that I have a PhD and I don't have a criminal record. It would amaze you how many of my colleagues who are professors came up to me after that and said, you've really been pulled over that many times? No, I just sat up and lied on something that I wrote. Yes, I have, but they just couldn't fathom it. Because they were like, you're a good person. you treat people well, you're nice. This is what you don't get. It's not about those things, it's about blackness. So part of highlighting it is for that group. On the other hand, is it traumatizing for us? Without a doubt. When I showed that today, every time I hear Diamond Reynolds, and of course you all know Diamond Reynolds is Philando Castile's girlfriend who shot that video. Every time I hear her 4-year-old say, Mommy, I'm here, that does something to me. It literally makes me tear up because I have a 4 and a 6-year-old, and 4-year-olds should not have to do that. So yes, it is definitely traumatizing. Even more reason why we have to do self-care. Even more reason why self-care for you might mean a hiatus from social media. It might mean making sure that you don't watch certain things. There was a time period when I could only read things. I couldn't watch it. I still go through periods like that. I can read it. That's part of what I do. Watching it does something very different to me. So you have to think about where your boundaries are and make sure that you take care of yourself. And as it relates to social media, as I said, I love social media. I think it's important for you all. My students have pushed me. I'm on it at Sociologist Ray. Feel free to follow me. I'll follow you back. I would love to hear these sort of stories and the things that you're talking about because it allows me to bring what you're doing into the classroom and into lectures that I give when I'm in all white spaces to talk to people about what's important to your generation. And I can't do that unless I have your voice.
So I just want to personally thank Kamani for deciphering through all those questions. And thank our panelists, first and foremost, for coming out. You all shared some beautiful things, and I hope that you all, as an audience, got something from this discussion, and you're going to go out into the world and be great. So just as a token of our appreciation on behalf of the UMCP chapter of the NAACP, we have some gifts for our panelists. So I invite some e-board members, if you're able to help me, please give these things to the panelists. You all can clap.